Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lab, where we're going to get hands-on with Google Cloud Storage through the command line. To do this, we'll be using gsutil in the Cloud Shell. Okay, to start off with, log into the GCP console with a user account, select the same project as we just used in the GCS lab, and open the Cloud Shell. Alright, I'll see you in the shell. Okay, so here we are in the Cloud Shell. Now I've changed the prompt here just so that we have a little bit more space, but if we type pwd to print the working directory, we see that we're in the same place as we were before. And if we type ls to list the files, we see the same readme file and folder that we cloned from GitHub before. Also, to verify that we're in the right project, we can type gcloud config list, which shows us what account we're using and shows us what project we're currently in. But what we're here to do today is to take a look at gsutil. gsutil is the command line tool that we can use to connect to Google Cloud Storage, and it mimics many of the commands that you have in a normal shell prompt. For example, if we type gsutil space ls, it shows us the buckets we have. Now something to note here is that the bucket name starts with gs://. Similar to how web addresses start with https://, native Google Cloud Storage addresses start with gs://, as we see here. Now if we do type gsutil space ls space gs://, we can simply hit tab to autocomplete the rest of the bucket name. When we hit enter there, then we see the objects that we uploaded in the console lab. Now you'll notice that this actually shows the test folder and not the contents of the folder. But if we wanted to list everything as a completely flat list, we can use ** to show everything. In this lab, we want to mimic some of the things that we did in the console lab, because the point I want to drive home is that you're still interacting with the same services in GCP. You're just using a different program. In this case, you're using gsutil, whereas in the last lab, you were using the console web app. Alright, so what we want to do now is we want to make a bucket. And we do that with gsutil space mb. Now, unlike the console, where we say first that we want to make a bucket, and then it starts asking us all of the questions we need to answer to be able to finish that, command line tools like this expect us to pass all of the information they need right up front. Now you will want to remember some of these commands for your exam, but to tell you the truth, most of the time when I'm using the command line, I'm looking up the syntax when I'm running different commands. It's usually the case that I've either not done that thing before, or if it's something that needs to happen often enough, then it's just been automated, so I'm not manually running that same command each time. The most important thing is that you understand what you can do, and then you can figure out how you do that by looking at the documentation. In any case, when you've written a partial command like this, the thing you can do is just type --help. Doing this can give you a few pages of really good information. If I scroll back to the beginning of this, I see that the syntax is gsutil space mb, and then I can optionally give it a class, and a location, and a project ID, and then a URL that specifies the bucket. So let's say that I want to make a bucket, and I want to make it in the Montreal region. Well, I can open up this web page here and scroll down a bit and see that Montreal is North America-Northeast 1. So let's copy that, close this page, and then respecify our command. gsutil mb -l North America-Northeast 1. Now the last thing we have to do to make this command work is to specify a bucket name using the gs:// notation. So let's call this one storage-lab-cli. When we hit enter, it creates the bucket, which we now see when we gsutil ls. The next command I want to show you is the gsutil label command. If we type gsutil label get and then the name of the console storage bucket, we get a response which is a JSON document listing the labels that we put on that particular bucket. Let's hit the up arrow to rerun that command and tell the shell to redirect the output of this into a file that we call bucketlabels.json. In case you're not familiar with it, that greater than symbol just tells the command shell to run the thing that comes before it and to put the output of the command into the file with the name that comes after it. We can see the result is exactly what we wanted by just catting that file. If we rerun the gsutil label get command against the CLI bucket, we'll see that it has no labels at the moment. But now that we have that bucketlabels.json file, we can run gsutil label set with that bucketlabels.json file against gs:/ and our CLI bucket. Now that it sets it, we can get it again, and we see we got exactly what we were hoping for. If we refresh the console, we can see that the same thing has shown up here as well, including the labels. Now, of course, if you wanted to add more labels to a particular bucket, you could always get a copy of the current labels, edit the JSON file locally, and then set those labels back. But that's a lot more work than you'd normally want to do, so there's one more version of the label command that I want to show you. If we type gsutil label and then ch-l, that can let us change the labels to add an extra thing that maybe we'll call extra label with an extra value, using the same label:value format that we've seen in other places. The final argument to this command is the bucket name. And now when we run it, we see we got what we wanted, both in the command line and when we refresh the browser. Now, speaking of the console, there are a lot of things that you can do in both the console and the command line. And like we saw in the last lab, the console may even give you the command line equivalent. But there are some things that can only be done through the command line. You can do things like control the life cycle here in the console, but object versioning control just isn't available here. We can only do that programmatically, whether that's through the command line or through an API call. Now, to see whether versioning is turned on for a particular bucket, we can type gsutil versioning get and then the bucket name. Here we see that it's not currently turned on. So if we change the command to be gsutil versioning set on and then the bucket name, it tells us that it's enabled it. And if we rerun the get command, we see enabled instead of suspended. Now let's remind ourselves of what we have in the bucket. Nothing. Nothing yet anyway. So what we can do is gsutil copy some file like the readme file that we have locally on our Cloud Shell and set the destination to be the bucket. And there we go. Now let me just rerun this gsutil list command because I want to compare what it shows to the same command run with the -a flag. Running gsutil list with the -a parameter tells it to include information about archived objects. Basically, we're asking it to show us information about object versioning. And here we see that the file that we uploaded includes a generation number of 153 blah blah blah. This is interesting because if we do something like remove this file, running the normal list command will show us that it's gone, but running the list-a command will show us that it's still there. That's basically what object versioning does. It means that every time we give GCS an object, it'll hold on to it forever until we tell it quite specifically that we want that object to be deleted. Giving it a new version of that object or just deleting it by name isn't enough. That can of course be very valuable to make sure that you don't lose data, and it'll also tie into the object lifecycle stuff that we'll cover later. Now, so far what we've done is we've uploaded a file from Cloud Shell into that particular bucket. And that's all well and good, but there's another very powerful thing we can do with gsutil. Transferring objects doesn't always have to involve the local machine that's running the gsutil program. So let's say that we wanted to copy all the contents of the bucket that we created in the console lab and put them into this new command line bucket. Well, to do that, we would just run gsutil, copy, and instead of just specifying a file as the source, we would give it another gs://. Now, if we give it the same ** specifier that I showed you in the list command, we'll copy all the objects regardless of where they show up in the folder hierarchy. And here we see that we've gotten all the files. But this is a little bit different than passing a -r flag to the copy command to make it recursive, because as we see here, the objects all show up in the root of the bucket, not where they originally were in the folder structure. Now again, let's list the files with the -a flag, and now we see the Cloud Shell README show up again. Let's take a look inside this new CLI bucket in the console instead. And again, we see what we see through the command line for the normal view, but the archived versions aren't something we can get at. Now, one last thing to point out is that when we copied these objects from the other bucket, we didn't copy their sharing settings. They were shared publicly in the console bucket, but here they're private because that's how the command line bucket is set up. So the last thing I want to do then is to share that selfie object. So let's enter gsutil, ACL for access control list, CH for change, and then -u for user, say all users, :R for read access, and then specify the file name that we want. And there we go. That object should now be available in the same way as the other objects that we set in the console lab. Give it a shot to try it out for yourself. Well, I hope you found this to be an interesting perspective on the Google Cloud Storage system that again shows how we can interact with the same services through the same control plane with the same results, in completely different ways. In some cases, you'll want to access it through the console because it's just easier, and other times, especially when you're automating things, it'll be much better to do it through the command line. Well, if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, please feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.